Got that. Thank you, Joy. Probably would have forgotten. Well, we just want to welcome all of y'all to Reems Creek Nursery this morning. As I said just a minute ago, we're super excited around here because trucks are starting to roll in with lots of new wonderful plants. It's the most exciting time of the year for us because we're so ready for spring to start. And the sun has been out, which has been fabulous. So we're thrilled about that. So today we're going to talk about digging deeper into gardening, and how this talk is kind of defined as really the myriad benefits that nature and gardening offer to us. Then there's going to be a little section about the 5 senses and things you can think about to enhance all the ways your senses can interact with your garden. And then the last little part of this workshop is just thinking about strategies for improving your garden and making it more enjoyable, no matter how big or small it is. If it's your balcony in an apartment or if you've got acreage, a lot of this stuff applies no matter what. It would just have to be a lot smaller if you were on a balcony. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will be good. And here. Oh Lordy, I went wrong, Joy. Joy.
Why don't you click on the?
Okay.
Yeah, there.
I am sorry, y'all. Something usually happens when I do this, and I don't know what happened. So let me go. Okay, that's better now. There we go. Okay, ready to roll. So digging deeper into gardening, and I'm just going to stop for a second for y'all to admire this gorgeous picture and notice how layered all those textures, colors, flowers, evergreens, beautiful. So first we're going to talk about the benefits of nature and gardening. So some of the benefits of nature: lower rates of stress, anxiety, and depression. Nature boosts your immune defense and anti-cancer effects. Increased energy and improved sleep. Nature lowers your blood pressure and reduces inflammation. There's actually a reduced risk of obesity. I believe I read that just by doing nothing else, but by going outside for a certain length of time, no diet is involved, it helps you maintain a more healthy weight. An accelerated recovery from surgery, even if there are just plants in your hospital room. Lower rates of preterm labor, asthma, and nearsightedness. That's pretty powerful. So I'm going to get us to think about humankind. So most of human life has been spent outdoors, mostly without built shelter. So if you look at this timeline here, earliest humans, 2,800,000 years ago, long time. We did not start building, and I'm talking very crude structures. We did not start building any kind of structures until 176,000 years ago. So that was a very, very long time in human history that we were just running around, maybe diving into a cave here and there, but actually building structures. Then it took us until 11,500 years ago to have any kind of agriculture. And that agriculture, when the slide says agriculture begins, we're not talking about tractors and row cropping and all of that. We're talking about saving a few seeds of grain and placing them close to where your structure is so that it's easy to harvest. So maybe it was a very early barley or something like that that is intentionally planted. Very simple agriculture. So that's over 11,000 years ago. Only 241 years ago did the Industrial Revolution start. And that is right about when our country started. And if you think about that, humans have been around for 2.8 million years. 241 years is not very long for us to be spending a lot of time inside. There was a show at the Arboretum a few years ago that showed how large houses were back in the day. And I'm talking about maybe in the 1800s, something like a 12 by 12 cabin would house a very large family, 8 children, 2 grown-ups, that kind of thing. And that was maybe a 12 by 12, smaller than your living room possibly, okay? And in the 50s, the houses were maybe 1,000 square feet, something like that, and 1 or 2, maybe 3 bedrooms, not usually 1 bedroom, but maybe 3 bedrooms. I have a house built in the 60s that has 3 bedrooms. One of the bedrooms is 8.5 feet by 8.5 feet. So, very small footprint, and no air conditioning up to that point. And so thinking about the amount of resources that we take. And then the next step up was at the present time and it was thousands of square feet, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of square feet as an average house size. So things have really changed. And then a big, big thing, 32 years ago, the invention of the World Wide Web. So I don't know about y'all, but I know I am guilty of spending way more time on my phone than I did 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So very little of our time on Earth has been post-industrial revolution. So essentially, we are an outdoor creature. Just since I gave this talk to a library a few weeks ago, and it seemed like as soon as that was over, these 2 different articles came out, this one in the Wall Street Journal and one in the Veranda magazine. So from the Wall Street Journal, they actually addressed some of the benefits for people with cancer of being outside. And the specific study was forest bathing in Japan. And so this group went and bathed in the forest for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon. And the benefits were realized for a full week of 7 days. So the scientists repeatedly found that after walks in the forest, human anti-cancer killer cells significantly increased, anti-cancer proteins increased, and levels of cortisol in the blood and adrenaline in the urine decreased. So less stress, better ability to fight cancer. In that same article, there's a great quote: there's an urgent need emerging in science and at the gut level, in that we all realize this is a need we have to increase the nature experience. The field is just exploding. Effects of morning sunlight, profoundly exposure to morning sunlight affects your mood, your health, your nighttime sleep. Outdoor light, even on a cloudy day, delivers considerably more lux than indoor light. Even rainy days will produce over 1,000 times more lux levels than indoor light can produce. And on sunny days, it's just, there's no way that any kind of indoor lighting can compete with that. And that light has very beneficial effects on us. The light comes into our bodies through our eyes. And in doing this, I never even knew this before I put this PowerPoint together, that the eye has over 2 million working parts. And it's actually the second most complex organ in the body after the brain. So exposure to early morning sunlight before noon, and really ideally between 6 and 9 in the morning, even as much as 15 to 20 minutes, can provide so many benefits. It's going to help you sleep at night. It establishes circadian rhythm. So when you go out into the light in the morning, that's telling your body the day has started. And your body, which, remember a few slides back, has mostly lived outdoors all this time. So your body's very attuned to circadian rhythms. And in the evening time, it's going to, when those circadian rhythms are enhanced, your body is going to be more ready for rest in the evening, and you're going to have a better night's sleep. But it also sends a wake-up call to the pituitary gland, which regulates so many hormones, and signals the hypothalamus, which coordinates and regulates most of our life-sustaining functions, and initiates and directs our reactions to stress. So those glands are so important in keeping us healthy and feeling good, and kind of diminishing that fight or flight reaction. Why nature's beneficial is not entirely clear. Some suspect that natural stimuli, the swaying trees, rushing water, and singing birds, might reset our fight or flight response, which is too often switched into overdrive by the stresses of urban modern life. That rest in turns gives the body psychological, digestive, and immune systems the break they need to function normally. That's PBS. And just think about it. You've been on the phone, on your phone, following the latest in politics or the latest about coronavirus, and how that may make you feel compared to just walking out in your garden, sitting on your porch and listening to the birds. Nature deficit disorder is actually a named condition, and even seeing nature from indoors offers benefits. Girls, there was a study done. There's a book called Last Child in the Woods, and in that book, the writer states that girls who are doing their homework by a window that can see nature outdoors will have increased attention for what they're doing. Doctors, and not just doctors, but psychologists and psychiatrists, are prescribing park prescriptions. So the National Park Service actually has a program, an actual legit program, park prescription program. Forest bathing, Shinrin Yoku, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Joy. That is what we were talking about earlier in the Wall Street Journal. It's just going out into the forest and walking around. Look at what it says: in 15 minutes, your cortisol, blood pressure, and heart rate have improved in just 15 minutes. A study in Europe said that if you can see and hear 14 different bird species in your daily life, you are a happier person. What a cool thing. So maybe all you have to do is put out a bird feeder and bring some happiness in. So your garden is outside every day waiting for you. And that garden could be as small as your balcony with a couple of potted plants. That garden could even be inside your house to a certain degree, house plants and things like that that are improving your space, making you breathe easier, giving you a little more mental space and beauty and a sense of place and ownership. So some of the benefits: lower rates of stress, lower rates of anxiety and depression. There's a definite key to being outdoors and anxiety and depression. Boosted immune defense and anti-cancer effects. I believe I repeated this slide just so that to remind you what all the benefits actually are. And another benefit that you get from being out in your garden is just the community that can be created. So I know last year, so many people started gardening because of coronavirus. And I myself, these are pictures from my yard, and this is a little story I'm going to tell you. So I did spend a lot of time in my garden, especially last spring and summer. And I live in Weaverville, so a lot of people walk in Weaverville, even before coronavirus. But since coronavirus, tons of people walk. And a lot of the same people walk by my house every single day. And so you start to like greet them and say hello. And there's a little conversation sometimes about, I also have a pollinator garden in my yard, but this is a story about this gourd vine that I planted. And it just kind of created this thing as people walk down my street. So you can see in the top left, there's just a little vine growing right there. I planted 2 birdhouse gourd plants. This is just 2 plants. Well, the next slide on the lower left, you can see they've taken over one TP, they've taken over another TP, and it's starting to creep up that phone pole. And I'll admit there's a little wire going up that pole, and I did put the vine under the wire. I honestly had no idea this would happen. And so, because this is just 2 gourd plants, I can't believe it. So then it starts going up the pole, and you can see over time, it starts then getting not just at the top of the pole, but getting into the phone wires. I'm getting nervous because I'm wondering about if the electric company is going to come and take me away, or if this is going to cause something bad to happen. And eventually on the far right, you can see that these vines are growing in every direction on the wires. You can't really see the gourds, but there were tons of gourds up there. There were as many gourds up in that mess at the top of the phone pole as there were on the ground. And so the point is that I made a little sitting area in my driveway because of coronavirus, and it was kind of behind the cars. So a lot of times people couldn't see me, but I could hear them walking down the street. People would stop and look up and talk about the gourds and try to figure out what is it and what's it doing and what's going on here. And then later, when we had frost and all these vines died, my neighbor, who's also on this call, and her husband, we were trying to harvest some of the gourds before they dropped to the ground so they wouldn't break. And that was just hilarious. I mean, I got my clothes basket. I was trying to catch the gourds. They were very heavy. I almost got hit in the head, Anyway, the point is, when you move your garden into your front yard, it gives you an opportunity to engage in really nice ways with your neighbors and open up, community conversation and delight. It gives you a way to share delight about things as simple as 2 gourd vines with your neighbors. So now we're going to go into the section about the senses, and I think I better check and see how we're doing. Okay. All right. So we're just going to go through the 5 senses, starting with the eyes. So thinking about the birds and the bees, think about when you walk outside and you see the butterflies flitting around and birds and fireflies rising up from the ground. Those, it just gives you a feeling of life is good, life is all right. When you walk out into your yard, or maybe you don't see any of these things in your yard right now, but these are things you can create. Different color blooms, different colors of foliage, containers. There could be colors that are in the pottery that you're using, in the seeding that you're using, even the color of the shutters on your house, things like that. Texture. So if you look at this picture, I feel like that picture is such a great example of all kinds of texture and all kinds of color right there. These are all shade-loving plants, and look how rich and beautiful that is. Then the sky is always an ever-changing painting of clouds, and is it gray? Is the sun rising? Is the sun setting? Are the stars out? What about the moon? And what can you do in your garden and in your life to enjoy the sky a little bit more? You know, is it that you think about it, mark on your calendar the nights of the full moon so that you go and sit on your deck and watch the moon come up? Can you frame that spot somehow where the sun rises? I don't see much of a sunrise and sunset from my house, but some people have that wonderful benefit. And then think about the lines of your garden. If you've got flower beds that are pathways, all of these things are kind of defining your garden and creating mystery, creating elements of interest, as well as art, so sculpture, pottery, lighting, any kind of object of interest is going to catch your eye and lead it through the garden. And then thinking about your views, short range, what's off your porch, long range, that sunset or the mountains, and even from indoors. I'm a big proponent of sitting in your favorite spots and looking out your windows and saying, what am I going to see from my house, from indoors, and how am I going to ramp it up so that I can enjoy my garden even more from indoors? For instance, sighting your pollinator garden from your favorite coffee drinking chair so that no matter what you're doing, you can be enjoying your garden. And these are just a couple of little examples that to talk about. So on the right-hand side, we've got a picture of a stairway. This appears to be a really, really narrow space, but look at all the things they've done. They've added shelves so they can put plants on the shelves. They've added lighting accents. They've added pieces of pottery, at least 2 or 3 that I see. They've added this kind of bird cage arty thing and a little, just a little tiny raised bed planter at the bottom. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in that tiny space, and it could have just been the stairs and that's it. So think about how you can bring delight to yourself and your friends and family. On the left-hand side, here's a little garden. You can see at the front, there's this bell, there's this nice curved pathway, and then there's this intriguing sort of fence gate thing, and you're wondering what's behind there. The whole garden is bordered with flowers, and if you look closely, you can see there are a number of evergreens that are dotted along this pathway, so that in the wintertime, when some of this green growth has died back, they still have elements of interest and surprise leading your eye through this garden and through the gate. So sound, okay, you walk outside, you hear the birds, the buzzing of bees, you hear the sound of the hummingbird showing up at your plant to sip. One of my favorite things I've ever experience here is when I walk out in the spring and in the top of the maple trees, I can hear the bees buzzing, feeding on the maple flowers. And it just gives me confidence that spring really is on its way. Frogs, especially if you have any little bit of water, you may have frogs around, crickets, cicadas. These are such beautiful, lovely sounds. That's the song of summer. The rustling of wind in the trees and in the garden, the sound of it in the grass, not the lawn grass, but if you have ornamental grasses. Wind chimes and bells, and wind chimes, there's so many different sounds you can bring into the garden with different types of wind chimes. Bamboo is one sound. Those shell wind chimes from the beach are just a beautiful sound. And then metal wind chimes, all kinds of different things. I just gave my friend this bell for Christmas that, to me, it reminds me of a buoy on the water, and she spends a lot of time on the water. So the sound of children playing always makes me happy. And water sounds, so that could be just a very simple dripping sound that you've intentionally created, or a fountain, anything like that, the sound of gravel crunching under your feet. Some sounds like leaf blowers, weed eaters, loud traffic, not so nice. So maybe you want to set up some plan in your yard that if you have a particularly noisy area that you can block maybe with a windbreak, but a windbreak is also a sound break. So best accomplished by planting a zigzag planting. So here's just a little inspiration, buzzing bees, and imagine the sound of those wind chimes, all those bamboo wind chimes in the wind. How pretty that would be. The smell, of course, roses, fragrant flowers, alyssum, dianthus, hyacinths, lilies, garden phlox, peony, lily of the valley. There's so many fragrant flowers. And bringing that in, to me, fragrance is just something that I love and adore and want more of in my garden. Herbs, basil, rosemary, lavender, sage, mint, thyme, lemon verbena. There, almost every culinary herb is fragrant. And the first time I planted basil, I did not even know really how to cook with basil. And I planted it just by chance at the bottom of my steps, a pretty long back step. And at the end of the season, I thought, well, if nothing else, this is wonderful, because when I walk by this basil plant, every time I walk by and brush it, I smell that smell in the air. Okay, I later did learn to cook with basil, but this is many moons ago. And fragrant trees and shrubs, think clethra, itea, lilac, fragrant viburnums, buttonbush, daphne, magnolia, glorious fragrance. Witch hazel when the sun is out, roses, so many beautiful roses. Gardenias, you do have to have a certain kind of gardenia outside here. Green, even things that do not have flowers, like green giant arborvitae and Arizona cypress, have very fragrant, delightful foliage. And Joy's going to love this one. The smell of soil, just the smell of soil releases endorphins. And it's just back to that primitive, not even that primitive human, just a few hundred years ago human that was digging in the dirt on a regular basis. And other things that might, bring joy, the smell of your dinner cooking outside. Let's just assume you're outside in your garden, the smell of smoke from the fire pit. Other smells you might want to contemplate where to place: your garbage cans, your compost bins. You might strategically place those in your garden so they're not necessarily part of what you're smelling. Just a few pictures. This is clethra on the left. It's a wonderful shrub, super, super fragrant. It blooms in the summer, like maybe late June into the middle of the summer. And if you keep it deadheaded, it will actually keep blooming, but it's super fragrant. It's one of my favorite shrubs. Hyacinth, what a gorgeous bulb, and what a beautiful smell. And alyssum is over here on the right-hand side. I planted that last year. Really, I used to avoid planting it because I thought it would poop out in the heat of the summer. That dear little plant bloomed all year and emitted its delightful fragrance all year. And it even hung in through some of the lighter frosts. I think it was still hanging in there in November. So I'm totally into alyssum now. And also taste. So big one, your vegetables, right? Look at those tomatoes. Don't you just want to eat that? And that delicious succulent looking lettuce mix on the side. Oh my gosh, how delicious. So culinary herbs, garden vegetables, cool season and warm season. Edible flowers like Johnny jump ups and pansies and nasturtiums, calendula. There's a huge list of edible flowers. Can you create an outdoor kitchen? And how about outdoor sitting and dining areas where you can enjoy that food you just harvested? And I'm going to guarantee that when you harvest that from your own garden, you can taste the difference in the vitality. You can taste the vitamins in that plant. It's just delicious. And back to the people that don't have a lot of room, very small pot on the porch, you could have a pretty nice lettuce harvest. Even a 4x4 garden or a 4x8 raised bed, which isn't probably very much of the average homeowner's real estate, will create a wonderful eating garden. So I definitely recommend, and I do recommend when you're talking about vegetable gardens, to put them very close to your house, and your herbs too, as close as you can, theoretically between your car and your door that you go in, so that you won't miss that the tomato's getting ripe and you'll pick it. And the culinary herbs, I have mine in my front yard. My back door, I'll have to go down a really long flight of stairs to get into my backyard. So right out my front door, I can run out there in the middle of cooking supper and harvest, and it's just awesome. Basil, and look at this. I just had to show you this gorgeous picture of this vegetable garden. Who wouldn't want to hang out in that garden? It's so inspiring. And I have on a lot of these slides, I've left, some of them are from Instagram. I've tried to leave who it is in case you want to follow them. Some of them are from Pinterest. So, some of them are just from my own camera or somewhere else, but a lot of these, there's a lot of inspiration to be found on Instagram. So what you can do with raised beds and arbors, and you always want to be thinking about your orientation to the sun, so that if you're going to have a tall arbor, you're not blocking the sunshine from the rest of your garden. And there's some delicious edible flowers. Just throw a few in your salad, throw them on top of your cakes. Beautiful. So touch, plant textures. Think about lamb's ears, those fuzzy, soft lamb's ears, or ferns, or smooth and furry stems, or the bark. Some bark is really smooth and some is really, really heavily textured, and how different that feels. And touch that releases fragrance. So talking about that basil, or fondling your rosemary, it just releases this smell into the air and actually puts it on your hands for a while. The comfort of the sun in the winter, the feel of that sun on your skin, and the shade in summer. Harsh winter winds, how those feel, May breezes, in August when you suddenly feel a chill in the air and it tells you the seasons are about to change. These are all things to just be a little more aware of, so that you're unified with the outdoors. And think about the feel of your garden furniture. So stone, metal, wood. How does it look? What's the vibe? Is it warm? Is it cold? A stone bench is wonderful. There's nothing that could destroy a stone bench. It is rather cold in the wintertime. So you may want to have alternate spots that you can sit according to the season, and think about their placement. Also think about what's on the ground. Just look at the texture right there in that third picture with all the stone on the ground. It could be that, it could be grass on the ground. It could be, there are a lot of different kinds of textures, a lot of different ground covers that we have or that are out there in the world that really make a difference in how it feels when you walk around with your feet, especially bare feet. And of course, well-oiled, well-working tools. If you're out working in the garden and your tools are kind of a part of you and you're taking good care of them, you're going to feel that with your hands. So these are a couple of examples. The one on the right is kind of a very pleasant spot to sit in the wintertime. There's a brick wall behind that bench. There's a brick pathway leading up to that bench. That is a very sheltered spot that's going to feel delicious in the winter. In the middle of summer, it might be a little hot in that spot unless there's a shade tree somewhere. So, but alternatively, here's on the left hand, a completely different vibe, very, very modern, very simplistic, grass in a pot, gravel, a boardwalk, but there's a shade tree and a bench. So that shade tree is going to be under that shade tree on that bench. It's going to be a lovely spot to sit in the summertime when you want to be protected from the sun. In the winter, you want to feel the sun. Thinking about assessing your current garden to maximize your enjoyment. So I'm just going to talk about this picture right here. In this picture, there is so much going on. You'll see this dining set right here in the front of the picture, and it's in the shade under the trees. And then you'll see back in that sunny area, there's a nice little sitting area in the sunshine, in the grass, completely different vibe over there, but it looks like there might be a little shade over there too. And just, you can barely see it, but kind of midway in this picture, there's another sitting area. So thinking about that, they have a little lighting in the garden. They've got shapes that are carried through this garden. So if you see that ball shape, it's in these pots that are planted. There's multiple ball shapes leading you through the garden on the right, on the left. Just repeating that shape helps to unify this garden. There's also the texture of the patio on the ground. And think about when you're inside the house looking out, it looks like that the door leads out into this patio. So when you're inside your house, you're looking out into this wonderful space. And I just have to put in a slide for gardening for good. I feel like we all want to pay attention to nurturing ourselves and humankind and the creatures that live on our planet and the planet itself. I just think that's good for our souls, and it's really good for the wellness of your family and your pets. Maybe you want to think about less grass and more garden. I do think there's value in grass. Grass is a wonderful spot for children to play, for grown-ups to play, for you to be able to hang out in the sun without, you're not really going to sit down in the middle of your perennial bed unless you're an artist drawing a picture or something. So it does offer a nice spot, but think about reducing the grass, having less grass to mow, and more of the fun things you can plant. You always want to protect your soil. It's a really valuable resource that is actually kind of on the endangered species list. And so anything you can do by planting ground cover, planting grass, mulching, planting trees or shrubs, perennials, to keep that ground where it is, to keep your topsoil. By adding to your plantings in your yard, particularly if you're using native plants, you're going to be helping the birds and you're going to be helping the pollinators. You can see on this slide, 25% songbird decline in the last 50 years. That's 1/4 of the songbirds. And they're talking about an insect apocalypse happening. I know there was a study done in Germany where 70% less insects were found in an area that had been previously monitored, and then they monitored it again. Drastic loss. So think about planting for wildlife. I'm a big proponent of gardening organically and regeneratively. Let's not just garden organically, let's actually make it better. Let's add to the soil. Let's add to the environment. Let's be guardians, caretakers, stewards of our planet and our particular piece of the planet. And there's something called the dark sky concept, and that is thinking about the kind of lighting you use, and that lighting can really affect pollinators. It can affect migrating birds and things like that. There's a website called Dark Sky. So if you want to find out more about that, you could look it up. But a lot of times the lights face downward. They do not face up and out. Another thing you can do is, instead of having a permanent floodlight on the corner of your house, you could have a motion detector light so that there'll be less disruption. So when you're thinking about all these wonderful things, it's just going to add vitality to your life. There's going to be more life in your little patch of the world, and the people and creatures that live on that little patch are going to be happier and weller because you're thinking about these things. So a sense of comfort. Does your garden have a sense of refuge? Does it have a connection to community if you want one, like we were talking about earlier with the front yard gardening? Do you have comfortable spots to sit in each season, in the winter and in the heat of summer? Do you have simple things like a place to set your drink? How about edibles that are close at hand for easy harvest, and edibles that are safe to eat directly from your garden, so that you can go out there and munch on your garden? Your children and grandchildren can forage around and you're not worried they're going to be poisoned. Are you providing habitat for wildlife? Because remember that wildlife, not only are you actually doing something critical, you're providing ecosystem services for the planet, but you're also making your corner of the universe feel more alive. And then special areas you can see from indoors. And have you created a happy feeling between your car and where you enter your home, so that every time you come home, do you feel like, I am so happy to be here? This is just my little wonderful abode. So checking out this picture, just look at the size of that space. It is very, very small. And within that space, they've got a sitting area. They have a fire pit. They have some artwork. They have multiple planters. And I'm pretty sure that that round ball thing is a water garden or fountain of some type. And then look at all the textural interest they have going just in that very small space. And how wonderful would it be to be in that space? We can do that. We just have to think it through. Here's a couple of other spaces. So on the right, you can see they've taken a very, very tiny side yard between two houses and created this cool little spot with seating, with appropriate plantings like hostas that don't need a lot of sun, and even a patio. So it doesn't take very much room to just add to your enjoyment of your space. The picture on the left is another side yard. So this is a pathway just on the side of the house, but look how wonderful it is with this brick pathway. Another cool gate. We've got different kinds of pottery leading us through this scene on both sides of that pathway. Again, we've got evergreens. We've got some kind of brick thing here that's providing interest, and lots of flowers that are sprinkled through, but also evergreens that are going to stand up over the winter. And probably that big vine thing over the gate is going to lose its leaves, but going to have some very good winter interest because of the structure of the vine itself. Another great examples on, I think this picture on the right-hand side is just fabulous because they have taken every inch of this garden. They've got window boxes on their upstairs. They've got a little greenhouse. They've got plants inside the greenhouse and a place to sit. And then they've got these various little patios and pathways with food growing and flowers growing and leading to this nice little patch of grass that has a kind of a fence around it that gives it a little feeling of protection. They've got a little tiny pond. They've got rain barrels and a living roof. They've got a compost bin. They've really got it going in this super small space. And it looks like a pile of firewood behind the fence, behind the grass patch too. So just saying, think creatively how much you can pack into a little tiny space. And then the picture on the right, just showing how by adding just this lighting out above this table, all of a sudden you've created this nice little outdoor space where you just feel like it's so festive to hang out. So be yourself. When you think about your garden, be yourself. We're all different. Some of us are going to like very, very formal gardens. That's going to make us feel happy. Some are going to want something more loose and wild that doesn't even look, that is completely wild. Think about evergreens versus flowers. And I'm always shooting for having evergreens in the garden so that in winter, you don't go down to bare bones nothing. So you want to think of those evergreens as the skeleton of your garden that are holding up the fort for the rest of the year. Color versus calming. So I love color. So my pollinator garden is pretty bright, but I also am pretty, when I see these pictures of gardens that are mostly all white flowers and the nice calming effect that has, I'm very drawn to that. And the fact that those white flowers are going to show up very nicely at night. Straight versus curvy. So I think as we've looked through these slides, you've seen examples of straight versus curvy, and there's a few slides still coming that just have a different feeling. Figure out what it is you want to create. Modern versus English country. So think about the benches we were talking about, very different vibes, but what's your vibe? Edible focus, always about that. I think everyone loves to be able to at least pick a little something, even just one plant of parsley in your yard. Sentimental plants, I think, are especially meaningful. I went to a garden tour at Mary Fearley's a few years ago, and she had numerous things in her very large garden that were sentimental to her. She had planted some cotton because her family had grown cotton in Georgia. She had, when her father died, she had actually rented a trailer and loaded his compost pile and brought that back to her home. That makes me cry. And then she had a whole flower bed dedicated to one of her aunts. It was named for her aunt. I mean, these are the kind of things that make a garden meaningful to you particularly. I get a lot of joy also out of cutting gardens. I love to bring flowers into my house. And if you're thinking about a cutting garden, you might think about shrubs and things like that too, to add to your landscape that you can cut to use for greenery and your cut flower arrangements. And of course, wildlife and pollinator gardens. We've kind of talked about that, but always encouraging that. So this is from my Instagram, and what I wrote was, you think you like it wild and a wild and woolly garden, and then you visit Charleston and all you want is a walled hidden garden. Love is fickle. So much green, so much texture on the ground, iron bricks, flickering lanterns. And it's so true. I was in Charleston, and I just, my family's from New Orleans, so I'm always enchanted by these sort of walled courtyards and those kind of things. But it's one of our co-workers has a garden that is very much a garden with different rooms, Joel, who you see in the Perennials. And so he's got, when you walk into his garden, he's got all these different areas that are very defined. And he's got a Japanese garden area. He's got one area that's more of vegetables, but the vegetable garden has a box hedge around it. And that's where his bees are in that side. And he's got another more ornamental garden with benches. So you can do it. You can maybe create the wild and woolly and the formal and walled garden all in one place. So here's an example of a more formal garden on the left with this seating area. There's a retaining wall in the back. You can see pottery. These boxes are trimmed into ball shapes. And then on the right-hand side, the reason I wanted to include this slide is that I feel like that single arbor contributes so much to this. Take in your mind, take the arbor away, and it's a nice house and everything, but that arbor adds so much to the experience of entering that home. So think about the ways you set the tone. So wintertime, which right now is a great time to assess your garden. It's easy to tell what's missing because all the deciduous things have lost their leaves. So do you need to add some evergreen? Would there be places that hardscaping would really add a nice touch? A fence and a trellis, those fences and trellises are sort of part of the architecture of the garden, the lighting and the pottery as well, or anything, sculpture, all of these things shine in the winter, and they all have a relationship to each other in the wintertime. So I encourage you to add green to your garden. By that, I mean evergreen, and think about the curb appeal that that's going to add as you drive up to your home. And also think about the shapes of those plants. Are they ball shapes? Are they tall upside down ice cream cone shapes? Are they different colors? In other words, there's blue spruce, there's the blue Arizona cypress, there's the deep, deep green of yew, there's sort of a medium green of arborvitae, there's the shiny leaves of holly, there's the red berries on the holly, there's red and yellow twig dogwood that give you really Dr. Seuss kind of winter interest. So determine the placement of all those key components. And let's just say you want to screen something out, a really good trick. I have in my yard wonderful neighbors, but in my backyard, I see through to where they park their cars. So in the back of my mind, I want to plant some kind of evergreen hedge there that would block them out. Well, so I could go stand out in the yard with a bamboo pole and someone can be inside and we can both have cell phones going and they could say, okay, move 10 feet to the left. No, 5 feet to the right. No, okay. And it looks like you're going to need it to be 10 feet taller than that pole if you want to cover that long range view of the landfill or whatever. You know? So think about that. And always think about putting the right plant in the right place when you're planting. So this time of year, you have to use your imagination because what's sunny now doesn't really count. What counts is where is the sun in the growing season. And so you want to make sure that you choose your plants appropriately so that they're happy, right? You want your plants to be happy, then they're going to thrive. Some of the plants that have great winter interest that I didn't already mention, crepe myrtles because of their beautiful bark, Harry Lauder's walking stick because of its curly, curly, curly nature. I think its best time is winter. Witch hazels are blooming right now, absolutely fabulous. Hellebores, also called Lenten rose, are blooming right now, beautiful, evergreen, shade-loving. Coral bells, many of them will make it through the winter without dying back. They're semi-evergreen. Some of the evergreen ferns like Christmas fern and autumn fern, and the kind of bark that you have on trees, like for instance, what's that peely maple, the one in the front, I forget the name of it, but anyway, there's lots of, let's just say birch trees. That peely bark of birch trees is really going to show up in the winter and the summer. And the movement of grasses. So if you don't cut your grasses down in the fall and you leave them there in the winter, you're going to have that swaying movement in the wind in the winter time. I also think that your container gardens are really important in the winter time because a lot of times the rest of your garden looks a little bare right then, and that'll just give you a little bit of cheerfulness and structure as you enter your house. Here's a couple of examples of what lighting can do. On the left-hand side, you can see that garden without the light, and you can see the garden with the light and how much warmer that looks. Honestly, I don't like that garden very much. It feels really fortressy to me, but this was a really good example of how lighting can really accent a garden. On the right-hand side, this is my stepdaughter Amelia's yard. And when she moved into this yard, it was completely flat. There was nothing in the yard but grass. And they have deer, so they wanted to fence in their potential vegetable garden. So they fenced it in. And they also added this wonderful arbor and gate, which adds, look at how much interest that adds in the winter, not even counting the summertime. She planted a New Dawn rose on it, which is one of her favorite climbing roses, and it just gets, it's going crazy in there. So just by adding this structural bit to her garden really defined her backyard differently. So thinking about style, open, welcoming arms versus a secret garden. So is your front sort of open to the street, or is it more like Joel's garden where he's got evergreens and a gate and you really can't see into there until you walk in? You can always think about using some kind of evergreen screening to get rid of the vision of the garbage cans, the compost piles, the cars, your cars, and the neighbors. Okay. And one trick you can use for cars, if it's sort of close at hand, you could plant something like an evergreen vine, Carolina Jasmine, unless you're at high altitudes. And that's an evergreen vine, and it would take up very little depth in your garden. Hardscaping that invites garden use and ups the curb appeal. So maybe that's a patio where you have a comfortable place to sit, where it's flat, and maybe it feels a little bit enclosed. So that's always a good feeling. Consider the time of day when you're most likely to enjoy the garden. That's a little different now with coronavirus and so many people working at home. But if most of the people that live in the house generally are gone to work in the daytime, they're probably going to be enjoying the garden a lot more in the evening than during the day. Unless they take our advice earlier in this talk and get out in their garden first thing in the morning and get all those benefits. The other thing is to think about is who is the star. So let's say you're starting a new flower bed or a new area of your yard. Try to figure out first, is there anything you need to hide? And if you need to hide something, what plant are you going to use to hide it? The next step is who is the star of the show in that flower bed. So you're not going to plant like 4 Japanese maples in a row. Maybe you're going to plant one Japanese maple that is this gorgeous centerpiece to that flower bed. And it's like there can only really be one star. So who's it going to be? Figure that out. And it might not even be a plant. It may be a sculpture or something like that. Create mystery with curves, arbors, and gates. I think all of us, the little kid in us, loves to like not know what's around the bend or what's behind that gate, or when you go through an arbor and then the garden opens up. It's just a fun feeling. Remember to have areas for kids to play, and I love to think about trees for them to climb. I climbed so many trees as a kid. I fell on the ground sometimes, but we had so much fun climbing trees. So maybe you think about not trimming the lower branches of your trees so your kids can climb up in there easy. And make some joy indoors, rewild that interior, bring in the jungle house plants. They're going to make you feel better. It's going to be beautiful, and your air is going to be cleaner. And anybody can do that, even if you don't have a balcony. If you just have a very small space, you can still have a few plants that make your space nicer. Here's an example, thinking about style. Look at these 4 gates. They're all super different. I love all of them. If someone gave me any one of them, I would love it. So the only one I could actually construct myself is probably the one on the lower right-hand side, but these are all beautiful. So the question is, what's your vibe? You know, what suits you? What really suits you? I wanted to show this garden on the right-hand side, especially because it is very formal. It's very symmetrical. And you're talking about a broad patio that then goes up some steps to another bricked area that then goes up some steps to this oval shaped grass patch. What a beautiful garden that is. And it's completely different than some of the wilder slides I've shown you. And here on the left-hand side, just a little patio, some chairs, a table, a fire pit. But doesn't that feel cozy and wonderful? That isn't very hard to achieve. And here is just a fabulous example of what can change a backyard. I'm going to say, looking on the left, that backyard does not make me want to go into the backyard. Okay. It just isn't very pretty, but look what they've done with this yard. And in part, a lot of it is by adding that deck and adding that boardwalk. It has really defined the areas of the yard. But not only that, it's made that wet, dirty spot on the before picture. Suddenly there's this spot that has made your house bigger, because looking at the size of this yard, I'm guessing that this isn't a very large house. So all of a sudden they've got this back deck, and not only that, they've got these beautiful plantings that they can enjoy from their back deck. Super great transformation. A garden is more than just a much loved physical space. It is also a mental space, one that gives you quiet so you can hear your thoughts. When you work with your hands in the garden, weeding or clipping, you free your mind to work through feelings and problems. By tending your plants, you are also tending your inner space. And over time, a garden is woven into your sense of identity, becoming a place to buffer us when the going gets tough. That's by Sue Stewart Smith, who has an entire book about this. Here's a couple of other examples. On the right is this wonderful garden in Montford. The owner built this. He's a stonemason, so he built this sculpture. And this is a small yard in Montford. The side yard where they park is not as developed, but the entire front yard is covered with plants. And there's even a dry stream bed running through this garden. It's absolutely delightful. And you can see in the background, if you look hard, there's another one of these structures with a plant on top of it in the background. And here on the left-hand side, another example, they've got this wonderful fence. Look at the details on the top of that fence, how unique that makes it. And the color of the fence with this bell and gate. And then you walk through into this area, this curvy path. They've got a birdhouse. They've got, it looks like a patio back there where the door is, and all these flowers, definitely a place that birds and pollinators are going to inhabit, along with humans. This is a wonderful quote by Umberto Posti, who is an Italian designer. This is a picture of his garden in Morocco. And he does do gardens for other people, but, quote, "When I make a garden for myself, it is the only time in my life when I allow myself to become a child. I don't hide anything. I don't want to prove anything. I want to allow myself the most possible joy and the most possible invention. It's just love, fun, and enjoy myself." Great advice. From Albert Einstein, look deep into nature, you will understand everything better. So, love, fun, invention, and oneness with nature. Just be yourself, make it your own spot. You'll have successes and also learning opportunities called things might die. All of us have had it happen. Don't be discouraged. If you burn your toast, you still are going to cook toast again. So don't feel discouraged. Embrace all of it. Outdoors is where your ancient self is at home. So get outside, feel happier, healthier, and more fulfilled. Thanks a lot for coming today. We have time for questions if y'all have any questions, and we're just going to say we're local. We really appreciate y'all coming in and seeing us. We're well rooted and we love what we do. Do we have any questions, Joy?
Yes, we've got questions. From Renee, we've got, did you use the gourds to make birdhouses?
Hi, I haven't made any. I used to grow, like, I used to do gourds as a thing, like made birdhouses and then made these painted gourds. So I used to have so many gourds, it was ridiculous. And I have not done anything with these. They are still pretty much sitting on my driveway drying, but I would be happy to. I don't have that many. I just have a handful of them, but if any of you are dying for a gourd, I'll be happy to share one with you. And I have not made any birdhouses yet, but I hope I will get around to that.
What kind of gourd did you plant to get that wonderful effect?
Well, it was a birdhouse gourd.
Okay, so
That's
that's
the
birdhouse.
yeah.
Huh?
But I'm gonna tell you, all gourds, the green gourds are just an awesome thing. They're like the pre-pottery vessel for humankind that is a renewable resource every single year. And they hold water. So you've all heard of dipper gourds, where people used to dip water out of the well. Bushel basket gourds. I have a huge bushel basket gourd that I bought from a woman who did some work in Nigeria. And the walls of the gourd, I kid you not, were like over a ½ inch thick because the growing season is so long there. So I'm very into gourds. I probably should stop with that just because I could talk about it a while. But I think all gourds are wonderful, and all of them are very, very viney. Not so much the ornamental gourds. That's a different family from the green gourds.
Okay, so if I wanted to do what you did, I'd look for a green gourd.
Yeah, so like bushel gourd, dipper gourd,
Bottle gourd.
Birdhouse gourd, bottle gourd.
Do you have those at Reems Creek now?
We usually do. I'm not absolutely certain, but we usually always have gourd seeds.
Yeah, we have seeds, and then some years we've actually had the bottle gourds and flats in the veggie section.
Yeah.
Those will be in with the warm season.
And if you do plant gourds, I would soak the seed overnight before planting. It's a very tough seed, and they don't like cold weather, so don't plant them before Mother's Day.
And what about Carolina jasmine? When do you plant that?
You could plant it now.
And do you have that?
We don't have it yet. It's coming soon. I heard someone say yesterday when, and now I can't remember. I think it's more toward the end of March or third week of March, maybe.
All right, next question. How long would it take in general to make these beautiful yard settings?
I think it depends on what you're actually trying to achieve. In other words, my old house, I had a very, very tiny front yard. I want to say it was like 30 by 15. And so it was kind of like one of those walled gardens. And it took less time than if you have a larger yard. So if you've got 1.5 acres or 10 acres or so what you could take it a couple of different ways to approach it. In some ways, the best thing to do would be to go all the way back and start with the very skeleton of the garden in the winter time and think about that. But I do think when you're designing your skeleton, you kind of want to know where you're headed with that. So in the case, say like Joel with his various garden rooms, he defined those areas and then planted within those areas. So maybe you take one area at a time, or maybe you have, like, for instance, in my own yard, I have a pollinator garden, and I focused on that last year, but I have not done anything in a huge part of my yard. And in part, it's because I haven't quite figured out my approach yet, but I wouldn't totally let that stop you from just jumping in with both feet.
All right, next question. Can you recommend any small evergreen plants / perennials for a shady sloped area with clay soil?
Yes, one, I would say the clay soil in my own yard, and my neighbor Lynn can vouch for this. I had like brick red, seriously, brick clay as my front yard dirt. And I'm sorry, I don't care if it's a native plant. I don't think anything likes to grow in brick. So, I mean, there are some things that will grow in brick, but I'm just saying, I always amend my soil. So I don't buy plants based on, I've got hard red clay, because I'm going to amend my soil. And I usually think about amending it 50-50 with compost. So in my own yard, I actually removed some of the very cloddy clay and amended it about 50% in this pollinator garden mixed with the clay and compost. So on to the plants, things that I could think of. I think yew is a great plant for shade. It can be trimmed. It can take quite a bit of shade, and it can be trimmed really quite harshly. It is a conifer, but it's one of the only conifers that can be basically cut to the ground and it will regrow. So I love yew, and there's ball shapes, there's tall, skinny shapes, there's, a number of different shapes. There's one here called Maureen that only gets about 2 feet wide by maybe, I think, 10 feet tall, 8 feet tall. And it depends on how shady it is. So some of the, my old front yard I was talking about was really shady. So some of the things I had in that yard were Japanese holly, but it did get morning sun. I had yew in the shadiest spot, and then which was under maple trees and only got late afternoon sun. So coral bells or heuchera is a great one for shady gardens. Lenten rose is a great one for shady gardens. One of those very first pictures that I showed was just ripe with beautiful shade plants. A lot of the Acorus. There's Florida Sunshine Anise that is sort of a bright green. I think it's an evergreen. It's a bright green shrub that adds a lot of brightness to the garden. Of course, hostas love shade. They're always a good, a lot of the ferns are really good, and you can look on the tag. So some of the coral bells and some of the ferns will take complete shade. And so if you look on the tag, some of them don't. Some of them are more suited to part sun to full sun, and some are more suited to part sun to full shade. So if you have a really dark yard, look on the tag and see. Other wonderful things, I love the, so columbine would be a great one for early spring flowers. The creeping phlox, not regular creeping phlox, woodland phlox, a nice ground cover. Green and gold is another ground cover. It does spread pretty readily. Trying to think what else.
There's the native Pakisandra.
Native Pakisandra, great one. That's a great one. The Carolina Jasmine that we talked about, the vine, it can take quite a bit of shade. Even, I mean, it depends on if it's just like, I've tried to push the window with some things, but you have to know you're pushing the window, and you might end up having to move the plant if it looks unhappy. In other words, I've planted some abelias that were where they got morning sun, but they definitely didn't get afternoon sun, that kind of thing. We have a huge shade perennial section that it's not fully stocked yet, because many things like ferns are still asleep and people don't buy pots of plants that look like nothing. And so we haven't brought those in yet. So, but we have a really great perennial department with so many beauties. Can you think of some that I'm forgetting about? I know, what about Tiarella,
Jacob's ladder.
sunflower, anemone? There's beautiful anemones that bloom in the fall. They're gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous.
Oh.
Lots of options.
Turtle head. Yeah, there's so many pretty things for shade. There really are.
All right, next question. Will you post this so we can rewatch?
Yes, theoretically, we will post it if we haven't had something go wrong on the Zoom end. Yes. So if you look in our newsletter next week, there should be a link. We did a workshop last week, and we had the link in it in the newsletter this week. And so next week we could post this link. Would that work for y'all?
Thank you.
All right, well, that's it for the questions.
We're so happy to see all of you this morning. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
You can probably turn off the recording now.